When HOA President Margaret Thornfield deliberately pressed my disabled daughter's hands onto a blazing grill at a school barbecue, she thought community service would be her only punishment. She was wrong. What happened next destroyed her career, reputation, and entire life. Some mothers never forget, and we never forgive. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The weeks that followed were a nightmare of hospital visits, painful treatments, and watching my daughter suffer both physically and emotionally. But the real damage wasn't just to Emma, it was to our entire sense of safety and belonging in the community. Emma became withdrawn and fearful, afraid to attend school events or neighborhood activities. She had terrible nightmares about being hurt again, waking up screaming and crying in the middle of the night. The confident, joyful child who had approached that grill wanting to help was replaced by a scared little girl who flinched when adults she didn't know came near her. The criminal case against Margaret dragged on for months, during which time she hired an expensive defense attorney who argued that it was a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by stress, not malicious intent. The lawyer painted Margaret as a pillar of the community who had simply made an error in judgment during a heated moment. The HOA board, which consisted mostly of Margaret's friends and allies, actually issued a public statement supporting her. They sent a letter to all residents suggesting that our family was litigious and looking for problems, and that we had blown a minor incident out of proportion for financial gain. Every court appearance was torture for Emma. She had to testify about the most traumatic day of her life in front of strangers, reliving every detail of the pain and terror Margaret had caused her. Margaret's lawyer even tried to argue that Emma's disability made her testimony unreliable, suggesting that her cerebral palsy affected her memory and perception. I watched my daughter's spirit break a little more each time we had to go to court. She would come home exhausted and defeated, asking why the mean lady didn't have to say sorry for hurting her, why she was allowed to walk free while Emma still had scars on her hands. After 8 months of legal proceedings, Margaret was sentenced to community service and 2 years of probation. No jail time. The judge said her previous good standing in the community, her lack of criminal history, and the isolated nature of the incident warranted leniency. He called it an unfortunate lapse in judgment, rather than a deliberate assault on a disabled child. That night, I tucked Emma into bed and watched her struggle to hold her favorite stuffed rabbit with hands that still ached from the burns and the ongoing physical therapy. The scars were fading but still visible, thin white lines across her palms that would always remind us of that terrible day. "Mommy, why didn't the mean lady have to go to jail like the bad people on TV shows?" Emma asked, her voice small and confused. "She hurt me really bad and it still hurts sometimes." I didn't have an answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the system fails, that sometimes people who hurt children get to walk free while the children they hurt suffer forever? How do you tell your daughter that justice isn't always just? "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, baby," I said carefully, not wanting to lie but also not wanting to destroy her faith in fairness completely. "But that doesn't mean what she did was okay. It will never be okay." "I wish she had to say sorry," Emma whispered. "I wish she had to know how much it hurt." That's when I decided that Margaret Thornfield would face real consequences for what she did to my daughter. If the legal system wouldn't deliver justice, then I would find another way to make sure she understood the pain she had caused. I started by carefully documenting everything, every HOA violation notice we'd received over the years, every nasty comment Margaret had made, every witness to her pattern of harassment and discrimination. I reached out to other families in the neighborhood and discovered we weren't alone in being targeted by Margaret's cruelty. The Johnsons, an African-American family who lived 2 streets over, had been constantly cited for excessive noise whenever their teenage son played music in their backyard, music that was barely audible from the street. Margaret had also complained to the police multiple times about their son looking suspicious when he walked through the neighborhood. The Garcia family had been harassed about speaking Spanish in their own backyard, with Margaret filing noise complaints and claiming their foreign language conversations were disturbing to neighbors. She had even tried to get their traditional quinceañera celebration shut down, claiming it violated noise ordinances. Elderly Mr. Frank, who lived alone and struggled with arthritis, had received dozens of citations about his lawn not being up to community standards, despite his physical inability to maintain it perfectly. Margaret had refused to allow him to hire a landscaping service, claiming it would set a precedent for commercial activity in the neighborhood. I compiled a comprehensive file documenting Margaret's pattern of discriminatory behavior and sent it to the State Housing Authority. It turns out that using HOA powers to harass families based on disability, race, national origin, or age violates federal fair housing laws, laws that carry serious penalties including massive fines and criminal charges. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Margaret had left a paper trail of discrimination spanning several years, all carefully documented in her own handwriting through violation notices and complaint letters. The Housing Authority found clear evidence of systematic harassment based on protected characteristics. Next, I researched Margaret's professional background. Social media is a wonderful tool when someone has an ego as large as Margaret's and loves to broadcast their life online. Through LinkedIn, I discovered that Margaret worked as a compliance officer for a major financial services company downtown. Her profile boasted about her attention to detail, commitment to ethical standards, and zero tolerance for rule violations. The irony was almost too perfect. Here was a woman whose job was ensuring ethical compliance, and she had deliberately burned a disabled child's hands in a fit of rage. I created a professional presentation documenting Margaret's assault on Emma, complete with medical records, witness statements, police reports, photos of Emma's burned hands, and character references from families she had harassed. I sent this comprehensive package to Margaret's employer with a detailed letter explaining how their compliance officer had deliberately burned a disabled child and showed absolutely no remorse for her actions. The letter was factual, professional, and devastating. I explained that someone whose job involved ethical decision-making had demonstrated the worst possible judgment by assaulting a child, and that her pattern of discriminatory behavior raised serious questions about her fitness for a position requiring moral authority. Margaret was fired within a week. Her employer released a statement saying they had zero tolerance for employees who engage in criminal behavior or discrimination against protected classes. Her 20-year career in financial compliance was over. I also discovered through social media that Margaret was planning to run for city council in the upcoming election. Her campaign materials talked extensively about family values, protecting our children, and maintaining community standards. She had already filed paperwork and begun fundraising for her campaign. I made sure every parent at Emma's school, every member of local parent organizations, and every family group in our city received copies of the police report, court transcripts, and news articles detailing exactly how Margaret protected children. I included photos of Emma's burned hands and quotes from Margaret's own testimony where she showed no remorse for her actions. Her campaign collapsed before it officially began. Donors pulled their support, volunteers resigned, and the local newspaper wrote an editorial questioning her fitness for public office. Margaret was forced to withdraw from the race and forfeit the filing fees she had already paid. But I wasn't finished. Margaret's greatest source of pride was her position as HOA president and her status as the unofficial queen of our neighborhood. She loved being seen as the community authority, the person everyone came to with problems and complaints. For 6 months, I attended every single HOA meeting, armed with evidence of Margaret's discrimination and abuse of power. I brought other affected families with me, the Johnsons, the Garcias, Mr. Frank, and several others who had suffered under Margaret's reign of terror. We calmly and professionally documented every biased decision Margaret had made, every example of selective rule enforcement, every time she had used her position to harass families who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable neighbors. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. At the December meeting, I requested a formal vote of no confidence in Margaret's leadership. I presented our evidence to the full board and all attending residents, speaking for nearly an hour about the pattern of discrimination and abuse that had characterized Margaret's tenure. This woman deliberately burned my 8-year-old daughter's hands because she believed children with disabilities don't deserve to participate in community activities, I said, my voice strong and clear. She has systematically used her position in this HOA to target and harass any family she deemed unworthy of our neighborhood based on race, disability, national origin, and age. Is this the leadership we want representing our community? I showed photos of Emma's burned hands. I read testimony from families Margaret had harassed. I presented documentation of her selective enforcement of rules based on discriminatory motives. The room was completely silent as the full scope of Margaret's behavior became clear. Margaret tried desperately to defend herself, claiming she had always acted in the community's best interests and that any problems were simply misunderstandings blown out of proportion by troublemaking families. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and too many people had witnessed her cruelty firsthand. She was removed from the HOA board by a unanimous vote. Every single board member and resident present voted against her, including several people who had previously considered themselves her friends. The new board immediately revoked all pending violations against our family and established comprehensive anti-discrimination policies. Margaret's house went up for sale 3 weeks later. Word had spread throughout the community about what she had done to Emma and her pattern of harassment against other families. Parents crossed the street to avoid her when she walked outside. Her longtime friends stopped inviting her to social events. The real estate agent confided to ours that Margaret was having serious difficulty finding buyers because of her reputation issues in the community. The isolation was complete and devastating. Margaret had built her entire identity around being the neighborhood's powerful leader, and now she was a pariah that no one wanted to associate with. The final blow came when I filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit for Emma's medical expenses, ongoing therapy costs, pain and suffering, and punitive damages. Margaret's homeowner's insurance company investigated the case and refused to provide coverage, determining that deliberately burning a child constituted an intentional criminal act that fell outside their policy terms. This left Margaret personally liable for all damages. Her attorney strongly advised her to settle rather than face a jury trial where Emma would testify about the woman who deliberately burned her hands, while dozens of witnesses described Margaret's cruelty in detail. The settlement negotiations were lengthy but ultimately successful. Margaret was forced to liquidate investments, take out loans against her house, and drain her retirement savings to pay the substantial settlement amount. The money was enough to fully fund Emma's ongoing medical care and therapy, establish a generous college fund, and provide compensation for the pain and trauma Margaret had caused. 6 months after that terrible day at the school barbecue, Margaret's house stood empty with a sold sign in the front yard. She had moved to another state, her reputation, career, and financial security all destroyed by the consequences of her decision to hurt my daughter. Emma's hands healed beautifully over time. The physical scars faded to barely visible thin white lines that you would only notice if you looked closely and knew what to look for. The emotional scars took much longer to heal, but with counseling, family support, and time, my brave daughter gradually regained her confidence and joy. The new HOA leadership, led by Mrs. Chin, created an inclusive community garden where children of all abilities could participate safely. Emma helped plant flowers there every spring, her once burned hands now strong enough to dig in the soil and nurture new growth. She also started an art program for children with disabilities, teaching other kids that being different didn't mean being less capable. One quiet evening about a year later, as I watched Emma carefully working on a detailed drawing at our kitchen table, she looked up at me with thoughtful eyes that had regained their sparkle. "Mommy, I'm really glad the mean lady moved away and can't hurt anyone else," she said matter-of-factly, returning to her artwork. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Do you think she learned not to hurt children after everything that happened to her?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest but age-appropriate. "I think she learned that actions have serious consequences. When you hurt people, especially innocent children, there's always a price to pay eventually." Emma nodded solemnly and went back to her drawing. It was a beautiful picture of our family at a community barbecue, everyone smiling and happy together. In the far corner of the paper, she had drawn a small, sad figure walking away alone, a reminder of what happens to people who choose cruelty over kindness. Justice isn't always swift, and it doesn't always come from courtrooms or judges. Sometimes justice comes from a mother who refuses to let anyone hurt her child without facing real consequences. Sometimes it comes from a community that finally sees a bully's true nature and decides they won't tolerate it anymore. And sometimes it comes from methodically documenting every cruel action until the weight of truth becomes impossible to ignore or escape. Margaret Thornfield thought she could burn my daughter's hands and walk away with nothing more than a slap on the wrist from a lenient legal system. She learned that some mothers will move heaven and earth to protect their children and ensure that justice is served, even if it takes time and creativity to achieve it. Emma still has those thin white scars on her palms, barely visible reminders of that terrible day. But she also has something much more important, the knowledge that her mother will always fight for her, that good people will stand up to bullies when it matters, and that even the most powerful neighborhood tyrants can fall when their true nature is finally exposed to the light. The community garden that replaced Margaret's reign of terror has become a symbol of what neighborhoods can be when they're built on inclusion rather than exclusion, kindness rather than cruelty. Emma tends her flowers there every week, her hands strong and capable, her spirit unbroken despite everything she endured. Sometimes healing isn't just about medical treatment and therapy. Sometimes it's about making sure the person who caused the harm faces real, lasting consequences for their actions. Sometimes it's about transforming pain into purpose and ensuring no other child suffers the same fate. Margaret Thornfield burned my daughter's hands in a moment of pure cruelty, But in the end, she's the one who got burned by the flames of justice. And that's exactly what Emma deserved, not just healing for her wounds, but the satisfaction of knowing that the person who hurt her paid the full price for her crimes against an innocent child. Hashtag the HOA Karen who burned my daughter's hands, a mother's revenge. The scorching summer sun beat down mercilessly on Maplewood Elementary's playground as hundreds of parents and children gathered for the annual end-of-school barbecue. The air was thick with excitement and the smell of charcoal beginning to heat up. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, and children's laughter echoed across the playground equipment. I watched my 8-year-old daughter Emma navigate through the bustling crowd with her bright purple walker, her face absolutely glowing with pure excitement. Emma had been born with cerebral palsy, a condition that affected her motor skills and made her hands shake slightly, but her spirit burned brighter than any star in the sky. She had been looking forward to this barbecue for weeks, practicing how she would help serve food and talk to her classmates. "Mommy, can I please help with the food today?" Emma asked, her words slightly slurred but overflowing with enthusiasm and hope. Her big brown eyes sparkled with anticipation as she looked toward the grilling station where several parents were already setting up tables and unpacking supplies. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied warmly, kneeling down to adjust her favorite pink sun hat that kept slipping over her eyes. "But let's wait for Mrs. Peterson to finish setting everything up first. We want to make sure we help in the best way possible." Emma bounced excitedly on her toes as much as her walker would allow. "I practiced at home, Mommy. I can carry the little plates and napkins. I won't drop anything, I promise." My heart swelled with pride and love for my determined daughter. Despite every challenge she faced, Emma never let anything dim her enthusiasm for life or her desire to contribute and help others. That's when I saw her approaching like a storm cloud. Margaret Thornfield, the neighborhood's self-appointed queen and iron-fisted president of our HOA. She stood near the grilling station like a military general surveying her troops, clipboard clutched tightly in her manicured hands, barking sharp orders at the parent volunteers who were trying to set up the food service area. Margaret had made our lives absolutely miserable for the past 2 years, ever since we'd moved into the Willowbrook Heights subdivision. She constantly cited us for the tiniest infractions. Emma's wheelchair ramp was architecturally unsightly and detracted from neighborhood aesthetics. Our therapy equipment in the backyard violated community appearance standards. And don't even get me started on her endless complaints about Emma's medical transport van parked in our own driveway. According to Margaret, it was commercial-looking and lowered property values. Every month brought a new violation notice, a new complaint, a new way for Margaret to make it clear that families like ours weren't welcome in her perfect little kingdom. She'd even tried to get our therapy swing removed, claiming it was playground equipment that belonged in a park, not a residential backyard. Principal Johnson approached the microphone that had been set up on a small platform near the main entrance. He was a kind man in his 50s who had always been supportive of Emma's needs at school, ensuring she had proper accommodations and encouraging her participation in all activities. "Welcome families to our annual end-of-school celebration," his voice boomed across the playground through the crackling speaker system. "We've planned a wonderful day of food, games, and activities for everyone. Please take your time to enjoy everything we've prepared, and let's make this a day our children will remember fondly as they head into summer break." The crowd of parents and children applauded enthusiastically. Emma clapped her hands together as best she could, her whole face lighting up with joy. She loved school events and always participated with such determination and happiness that it made other parents smile just watching her. Emma tugged insistently at my summer dress, her small hand gripping the fabric. "Mommy, I really want to help flip the hamburgers like the big kids do. Can I please try? I've been practicing with my play kitchen at home." My heart ached with that familiar mixture of love and protectiveness that every parent of a special needs child knows so well. Emma always wanted to do everything the other children did, despite the physical limitations that made simple tasks more challenging for her. Her determination and optimism never failed to amaze me, but I also knew how cruel the world could be to children who were different. "Let's go ask nicely if you can help in a safe way that works for everyone," I suggested, taking her free hand gently in mine. "Maybe there's a special job just perfect for you." We made our way slowly across the playground toward the grilling station, Emma using her walker with practiced ease. The wheels bumped slightly over the uneven grass, but she navigated confidently, having learned to adapt to all kinds of terrain. Other families smiled and waved as we passed, many of them knowing Emma from school events and always impressed by her positive attitude. The grilling area was a hub of activity with several parent volunteers bustling around. Large picnic tables had been set up with red and white checkered tablecloths, and coolers full of drinks sat in the shade under pop-up canopies. The smell of charcoal and lighter fluid filled the air as the grills were being prepared for cooking. Mrs. Chin, our kind neighbor from 3 houses down, was arranging hamburger and hot dog buns in neat rows on large serving trays. She looked up and saw us approaching, her face immediately breaking into a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Emma, how wonderful to see you here today," Mrs. Chin said enthusiastically, setting down her work to give Emma her full attention. "You look so pretty in that pink dress. Would you like to help me arrange these buns on the trays? I could really use an extra pair of careful hands." Emma's eyes went wide with excitement and she nodded eagerly. "Yes, please. I want to help so much. I promise I'll be really careful and do a good job." I felt a wave of gratitude toward Mrs. Chen for always including Emma and making her feel valued and capable. There were still good people in the world, people who saw past disabilities to the wonderful child underneath. But before Emma could even move closer to the table, Margaret's sharp, cutting voice sliced through the friendly chatter like a knife through butter. "Actually," Margaret's sharp voice cut through the friendly chatter, "I don't think that's appropriate. This is a food preparation area. We need to maintain health standards." I felt my blood pressure rise. "She just wants to help arrange buns on a tray, Mrs. Thornfield." Margaret's cold blue eyes fixed on Emma, then me. "I'm sorry, but I cannot allow a child with her condition to handle food that other people will eat. It's a liability issue." The other parents fell silent. Mrs. Chen looked mortified. Emma's face crumpled, and I saw the familiar hurt that appeared whenever someone treated her differently. "Her condition is cerebral palsy, not a contagious disease," I said firmly. "She's perfectly capable of helping with simple tasks." "I'm the event coordinator and I make the safety decisions," Margaret snapped. "The answer is no." Principal Johnson, who had been watching from a distance, approached our group. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem at all," Margaret said with a fake smile. "Just maintaining proper food safety protocols." Emma pulled on my hand. "It's okay, Mommy. I don't want to help anymore." My heart shattered. I knelt down to Emma's eye level, ignoring Margaret's presence completely as I focused all my attention on my precious daughter. I gently cupped her face in my hands, looking directly into her sad brown eyes that were beginning to fill with unshed tears. "Sweetheart, listen to me very carefully," I said softly but firmly. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with you wanting to help and be part of this community. You are smart, capable, and wonderful exactly as you are. Some people just don't understand how special and talented you are, but that's their problem, not yours." "I heard that," Margaret hissed from behind me, her voice dripping with venom and self-righteous indignation. "I will not be spoken to like that by anyone, especially not in front of all these people. This is exactly the kind of entitled, demanding attitude I've come to expect from your family over the past 2 years." I stood up slowly, every muscle in my body tense with barely controlled rage. My voice was dangerously quiet when I spoke, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks. "Entitled?" I repeated, turning to face Margaret with ice in my eyes. "My 8-year-old daughter wanting to participate in a school community activity alongside her classmates is entitled behavior? Your daughter needs to learn her limitations and accept them," Margaret said, her voice carrying clearly across the playground as more and more parents and children stopped what they were doing to stare at our confrontation. "Not everyone gets to do everything they want in life. That's just reality, and the sooner she learns that, the better off she'll be." The absolute cruelty and callousness of her words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I heard several parents gasp audibly, and Mrs. Chin took a step back in shock. Emma's eyes filled with tears that began spilling down her cheeks, and she pressed her face against my dress, trying to hide from the terrible words. Principal Johnson, who had been greeting families near the school entrance, noticed the commotion and started walking quickly toward our group. His face showed concern as he saw the tension and the crowd of people gathering around us. "Margaret, perhaps we should discuss this privately," he started diplomatically, clearly trying to defuse the situation before it escalated further. "No," Margaret cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand, her face flushed red with anger and self-righteousness. "I'm tired of tiptoeing around and walking on eggshells when it comes to this family. They've been nothing but trouble since the day they moved into our beautiful neighborhood 2 years ago." She was really warming up now, her voice getting louder and more venomous with each word. The playground had grown increasingly quiet except for Margaret's voice carrying on the warm summer air. Parents were pulling their children closer, some looking shocked, others clearly uncomfortable with the public scene unfolding before them. "Do you people have any idea how much my property taxes have increased since this family moved into Willowbrook Heights?" Margaret continued, gesturing wildly with her clipboard. The township had to install special ramps and accessibility features throughout the neighborhood. The rest of us hard-working, tax-paying citizens are paying for their choices and their problems. My choices. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My voice cracked with emotion and disbelief. What choices are you talking about exactly? Margaret's eyes were blazing with hatred now, her mask of civility completely dropped. You chose to have a defective child and then expect the entire rest of the community to bend over backwards to accommodate your poor decisions. You chose to burden the neighborhood with. She never got to finish that horrific sentence. Mrs. Chin stepped forward, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by righteous fury. How dare you, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. How dare you call an innocent child defective? You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. Mr. Rodriguez, whose daughter was in Emma's class, moved closer to our group. Margaret, you've gone way too far. This is completely unacceptable behavior. But Margaret wasn't finished. Her face was twisted with rage and something darker, a cruelty that went beyond simple ignorance or discomfort. She turned toward the large charcoal grill where the hot coals were glowing bright red and orange, the metal grates already heated to cooking temperature. You want your precious daughter to help so badly? Margaret said, her voice taking on a dangerous, almost maniacal tone. Fine. Let's see just how helpful and capable she really is. A chill ran down my spine as I watched Margaret's expression change. Something was very wrong. The way she was looking at Emma, the way she was moving toward the grill, every maternal instinct I had started screaming danger. Don't you dare, I said, stepping protectively in front of Emma. But Margaret was already moving, faster than I expected. Before anyone could fully process what was happening, she lunged forward and grabbed Emma's thin arm with shocking force, her fingernails digging into my daughter's soft skin. Come on, sweetie, Margaret said in a sickly sweet voice that didn't match the violence in her eyes. Let's show all these people how capable and helpful you really are. Let's demonstrate exactly what happens when children don't know their place. Stop. Don't touch her. I shouted, lurching forward desperately. But Margaret was already dragging Emma toward the blazing hot grill, the child's walker clattering to the ground as she was pulled away from it. Emma was screaming in terror and confusion, not understanding what was happening but sensing the danger in Margaret's grip and voice. Stop this right now. Principal Johnson shouted, running toward us as fast as his legs could carry him. Several other parents started moving in our direction, but Margaret was quicker. With horrifying deliberation, she grabbed both of Emma's small hands and pressed them down hard against the searing hot metal grill grates. The sound that came from my daughter's throat was unlike anything I had ever heard, a scream of pure agony that seemed to pierce through every parent's soul on that playground. The smell of burning flesh immediately filled the air, making several people gag and step backwards in horror. This is what happens when children don't learn their limitations. Margaret screamed over Emma's cries. This is what happens when parents don't teach their children to know their place. I tackled Margaret with every ounce of strength in my body, sending her sprawling backwards into the grass and finally breaking her grip on my daughter. Emma collapsed to the ground, sobbing and holding her burned hands against her chest, her whole body shaking with pain and shock. Call 911 right now. I screamed at the top of my lungs, gathering Emma into my arms as carefully as I could. Someone call an ambulance. Oh baby, oh my sweet, sweet baby, mommy's here. I was just trying to teach her an important lesson, Margaret said from where she lay on the ground, her voice shaky but still defiant. She needed to learn that actions have consequences, that not everyone gets to do whatever they want. You deliberately burned a child. Mrs. Chin screamed, her face red with fury. You intentionally burned an 8-year-old child's hands on a hot grill. Emma's palms were bright red and already forming angry, painful blisters. Her cries had become weak whimpers as shock began setting in. She looked up at me with confused, terrified eyes that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. Mommy, why did she hurt me? Emma whispered through her tears. What did I do wrong? I just wanted to help. I just wanted to be like the other kids. You didn't do anything wrong, baby, I said, my own tears falling freely now. Nothing at all. You are perfect exactly as you are. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. Principal Johnson was already on his phone with emergency services, his face pale with shock and horror at what he had just witnessed. Yes, we need an ambulance at Maplewood Elementary immediately. A child has been seriously injured. Adult female deliberately burned a child's hands on a grill. We need police and paramedics right away. Other parents had formed a protective circle around Emma and me, some crying themselves as they watched my daughter's pain. Mr. Patterson was recording everything on his phone, making sure there would be evidence of what Margaret had done. Mrs. Rodriguez, who worked as a pediatric nurse, knelt beside us with tears streaming down her face. "Let me see her hands, sweetheart," she said gently to Emma, her professional training kicking in despite her emotional reaction. "I need to check how severe the burns are so I can help the paramedics when they get here." Emma was hyperventilating now, her whole body shaking uncontrollably with pain and shock. Her face was pale and covered in sweat, and I could see she was going into shock from the trauma and pain. "Mommy, it hurts so much," she gasped between sobs. "My hands are on fire. Why did the mean lady hurt me? What did I do to make her so angry? I just wanted to help with the hamburger buns." "You didn't do anything wrong, my brave girl," I said, rocking her gently while being careful not to jostle her injured hands. "Nothing at all. You are the sweetest, most wonderful child in the world. This isn't your fault. You did nothing to deserve this." Margaret was struggling to get back to her feet, brushing grass stains off her white designer pants and straightening her hair. She looked around at the circle of furious parents surrounding her, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. "Everyone is completely overreacting," she said, her voice less confident now but still defiant. "The grill was barely hot. I was just trying to teach the child an important lesson about safety and knowing her limitations. I barely touched her to the grates." "You barely touched her?" Mr. Patterson stepped toward Margaret, his phone still recording. "You just deliberately assaulted a disabled child in front of 50 witnesses. You grabbed her arms and forced her hands onto a hot grill. That's not teaching a lesson, that's child abuse." "I was demonstrating the dangers of kitchen equipment to show why certain children shouldn't be around cooking areas," Margaret insisted, but her voice was getting shakier as she realized the severity of what she had done. It was an educational moment that got blown out of proportion. Mrs. Chen was shaking with rage. "Educational moment? You monster. You deliberately burned an innocent child because you couldn't stand the thought of her participating in a community event." The ambulance arrived within what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes. The paramedics immediately went to work on Emma, carefully examining her burns and starting treatment to prevent infection and manage her pain. They were gentle and professional, but I could see the anger in their eyes as they processed what had happened to such a young child. "These are second-degree burns on both palms," the lead paramedic explained to me as they prepared Emma for transport. "They're serious, but with proper treatment she should heal completely. We're going to take her to Children's Hospital where the burn unit can provide the best care." The police officers arrived just as the ambulance was loading Emma into the back. Officer Rodriguez approached me while his partner went to interview witnesses and take Margaret into custody. "Ma'am, I need to get your statement about what happened here," he said gently. "But first, do you want to ride with your daughter to the hospital? We can take your statement there." I looked back at Margaret, who was now being handcuffed while loudly protesting her innocence. "I want to make sure she can't hurt anyone else," I said firmly. "Don't worry about that," Officer Rodriguez assured me. "We have multiple witnesses and video evidence. She's going to be charged with child endangerment and assault. Your daughter needs you right now." At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Emma had second-degree burns covering most of both palms. The burns were deep and painful, but with proper treatment, skin grafts wouldn't be necessary. However, Emma would need weeks of treatment, daily bandage changes and extensive physical therapy to regain full use of her hands. The worst part wasn't even the physical injuries, though watching Emma cry from pain broke my heart over and over again. The real damage was psychological. My confident, outgoing daughter who had approached that grill so excited to help was replaced by a scared, withdrawn child who flinched whenever adults she didn't know came near her. "Mommy, will I ever be able to draw pictures again?" Emma asked from her hospital bed, staring at her heavily bandaged hands with tears in her eyes. Art was Emma's greatest passion and talent. Despite her motor challenges, she created beautiful, imaginative drawings that filled our refrigerator, covered our walls, and always amazed her teachers. She spent hours every day with her crayons and colored pencils, creating wonderful worlds full of rainbows and unicorns and happy families. The thought that Margaret might have stolen that joy and ability from her made me want to scream with rage. "The doctors say that with proper physical therapy and time, your hands will heal completely," I promised, stroking her hair with trembling fingers. "You'll draw again, baby. You'll create beautiful pictures again. I promise you that." But even as I made that promise, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The burns were severe and there was always a chance of permanent nerve damage or loss of fine motor control. Margaret might have destroyed my daughter's future as an artist with her moment of cruel rage. But the real damage wasn't just physical. Emma became withdrawn, afraid to attend school events or neighborhood activities. She had nightmares about being hurt again. The confident, joyful child who had approached that grill wanting to help was replaced by a scared little girl who flinched when adults she didn't know came near her. Margaret was arrested and charged with child endangerment and assault. But she hired an expensive lawyer who argued it was a momentary lapse in judgment, not malicious intent. The HOA board, mostly her friends, publicly supported her. They even sent a letter to all residents suggesting our family was litigious and looking for problems. The criminal case dragged on for months. Emma had to testify, reliving that horrible day in front of strangers. Margaret's lawyer tried to argue that Emma's disability made her testimony unreliable. I watched my daughter's spirit break a little more each time we had to go to court. Margaret got community service and probation. No jail time. The judge said her previous good standing in the community and lack of criminal history warranted leniency. That night, I tucked Emma into bed and watched her struggle to hold her favorite stuffed animal with hands that still ached from the burns. "Mommy, why didn't she have to go to jail like bad people on TV?" I didn't have an answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old. How do you explain that sometimes the system fails, that sometimes people who hurt children get to walk free while the children they hurt suffer forever? That's when I decided Margaret Thornfield would face real consequences for what she did to my daughter. I started by documenting everything. Every HOA violation notice we'd received, every nasty comment Margaret had made, every witness to her pattern of harassment. I reached out to other families in the neighborhood and discovered we weren't alone. Margaret had targeted several families, the Johnsons because they were black and their teenage son played music too loud, the Garcias because they spoke Spanish in their own backyard, and the elderly Mr. Frank because his yard wasn't perfect due to his arthritis. I compiled a file of Margaret's discriminatory behavior and sent it to the State Housing Authority. Turns out, using HOA powers to harass families based on disability, race, or national origin violates federal fair housing laws. Next, I researched Margaret's background. Social media is a wonderful thing when someone has an ego like hers. I discovered Margaret worked as a compliance officer for a financial services company. Her LinkedIn profile boasted about her attention to detail and commitment to ethical standards. I created a professional-looking presentation documenting Margaret's assault on Emma, complete with medical records, witness statements, and photos of Emma's burned hands. I sent it to Margaret's employer with a letter explaining how their compliance officer had deliberately burned a disabled child and showed no remorse. Margaret was fired within a week. I also discovered Margaret was planning to run for city council. Her campaign materials talked about family values and protecting our children. I made sure every parent at Emma's school, every member of local parent groups, and every family organization in town received copies of the police report and court transcripts showing exactly how Margaret protected children. Her campaign collapsed before it officially started. But I wasn't finished. Margaret's greatest pride was her position as HOA president and her status in the community. She loved being seen as the neighborhood authority, the person everyone came to with problems. I attended every HOA meeting for 6 months, armed with evidence of Margaret's discrimination. I brought other affected families with me. We calmly, professionally documented every biased decision, every selective enforcement of rules, every time Margaret used her position to harass families who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. At the December meeting, I requested a vote of no confidence in Margaret's leadership. I presented our evidence to the full board and all attending residents. Photos of Emma's burned hands. Testimony from families Margaret had harassed. Documentation of selective rule enforcement based on race, disability, and ethnicity. The room was silent as I spoke. This woman deliberately burned my 8-year-old daughter's hands because she thought children with disabilities don't deserve to participate in community activities. She has used her position in this HOA to target and harass any family she deems unworthy of our neighborhood. Is this the leadership we want? Margaret tried to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was removed from the board by a unanimous vote. The new board immediately revoked all pending violations against our family and established anti-discrimination policies. Margaret's house went up for sale 3 weeks later. Word had spread throughout the community about what she'd done. Parents crossed the street to avoid her. Her real estate agent told mine that Margaret was having trouble finding buyers because of her reputation issues. The final blow came when I filed a civil lawsuit for Emma's medical expenses, therapy costs, and pain and suffering. Margaret's homeowner's insurance refused to cover an intentional assault, leaving her personally liable. Her lawyer advised her to settle rather than face a jury trial where Emma would testify about the woman who deliberately burned her hands. The settlement was substantial enough to fully fund Emma's therapy and future medical needs, plus establish a college fund. Margaret had to liquidate investments and take out loans to pay it. 6 months after that terrible day at the school barbecue, Margaret's house stood empty with a sold sign in the yard. She'd moved to another state, her reputation, career, and finances in ruins. Emma's hands healed beautifully. The physical scars faded to thin white lines that you'd only notice if you looked closely. The emotional scars took longer, but with counseling and time, my brave daughter regained her confidence. One evening, as I watched Emma carefully drawing a picture at the kitchen table, she looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mommy, I'm glad the mean lady is gone." "Me too, baby." "Do you think she learned not to hurt children?" I considered my answer carefully. "I think she learned that actions have consequences. When you hurt people, especially children, there's always a price to pay." Emma nodded solemnly and went back to her drawing. It was a picture of our family at a barbecue, everyone smiling and happy. In the corner, she'd drawn a small figure walking away alone. Justice isn't always swift, and it doesn't always come from courtrooms. Sometimes justice comes from a mother who refuses to let anyone hurt her child without consequences. Sometimes it comes from a community that finally sees a bully for who they really are. And sometimes it comes from documenting every single cruel action until the weight of truth becomes impossible to ignore. Margaret Thornfield thought she could burn my daughter and walk away with a slap on the wrist. She learned that some mothers will move heaven and earth to protect their children and ensure justice is served. Emma still has those thin white scars on her palms. But she also has something more important: the knowledge that her mother will always fight for her, that good people will stand up to bullies, and that even the most powerful neighborhood tyrants can fall when their true nature is exposed. The new HOA president, Mrs. Chin, created an inclusive community garden where all children can participate regardless of ability. Emma helps plant flowers there every spring, her once burned hands now strong enough to dig in the soil and nurture new growth. Sometimes healing isn't just about medical treatment. Sometimes it's about making sure the person who caused the harm faces real consequences for their actions. Sometimes it's about transforming pain into power and ensuring no other child suffers the same fate. Margaret Thornfield burned my daughter's hands, but in the end she's the one who got burned. And that's exactly the justice Emma deserved.